Welcome to the NAPB Early Career Working Group panel discussion series focused on the future challenges and prospects in plant breeding. And today we have three very distinguished women plant breeders. And thank you all for your attendance, and a special thanks to our panelists and our moderator for being here today. Before we get started, I do have a few announcements. For those of you viewing today, we will have live Q&A, and we ask that you please use the Q&A tab to ask questions that instead of the chat option that you see. The Q&A allows us to record both your input and the answers to those. So if you could do that, we'd appreciate it. And then also, please remember to register for the annual meeting in Guelph that's coming up in August. The early bird deadline is passed, but the final deadline is July 27th. And you may have seen an email go out advertising requests for applications for the AFRI Foundational and Applied Science Competitive Grants Program. Those proposals are due on July 25th, and more information about that program can be found online under the funding opportunities at nifa.usda.gov. And so lastly, we're also looking forward to the last installment of the NAPB Education Committee webinar series. And that will be held on June 22nd at 2 p.m. Eastern, where Laura Malpin is going to speak about translating science, the journey from plant breeders to storytellers. And so that's all I have. And I'll turn it over to our moderator, Tamara Miller, who is a PhD student at UC Davis. All right.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much, Kari and Chris and Mark, for organizing this, and additionally to our panelists who are taking their time, and to all of you for listening. I'm Tamara Miller, and I'm a PhD candidate. I work on dry bean breeding at the University of California at Davis. And I'm going to be moderating this panel, and my job is just to keep track of time and then also read the questions. So there's 3 topics, but first we'll let each panelist introduce themselves and say a little bit about what they're working on. So I'm going to turn it over first to Stacy Bonos, Dr. Stacy Bonos, sorry.
I am a professor at Rutgers University in the Department of Plant Biology. I work on perennial grass breeding, mainly turfgrass, but I do some work at switchgrass as well. They're actually 2 very different systems. In one, we're trying to breed for less biomass, and one we're trying to breed for more biomass, so they're kind of opposite things. But they are all perennial grasses, and we do work on lots of different traits for these grasses. And if you are familiar with a lot of the different sporting events, especially ones that are going on right now, the World Cup, which is coming up in Russia, the US Open for golf is coming up at Shinnecock in the next 2 weeks, I think. Many of these locations have our grasses being grown on them. So the Rose Bowl for, the football games. So our grasses are used widely throughout the world. And we've developed more than 400 grasses in the department. And since I've been involved with Rutgers, I've worked on over 200 of those. And we work actually on, it's not just one species. There are actually about 13 different cool season turfgrass species that we work on. So I'll just leave it at that. And thank you so much for the invitation to join you today. I'm looking forward to our discussions.
Thank you. And then next up, we have Claire Luby.
Hi, everyone. My name is Claire Luby. I am currently a postdoc at the University of Illinois, working on an organic research and extension initiative grant that's developing a participatory plant breeding and trialing network for developing organic varieties of corn, food grade corn. Although I'll be moving, I did my PhD at the University of Wisconsin, where we developed these carrots you see in the background of the slide. And I will actually be going back there to this fall to work on a project with a couple of the Native American tribes in Wisconsin, documenting some of their heritage varieties and producing foundation seed of those. So that's the photo you see of the corn there. I also wanted to mention that I am on the board of the Open Source Seed Initiative, as well as the Student Organic Seed Symposium and Society of Organic Seed Professionals. I think those might come up in some of my answers to the questions. So I wanted to mention that as well. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Claire. And finally, we have Lindsay Wyatt.
Hello, I am a pumpkin and squash breeder at Johnny's Selected Seeds. I've been there about 3 years since finishing my PhD in plant breeding and genetics at Cornell. Also working mostly on squash there, so I'm really excited to still be working on my favorite crop. At Johnny's, we're a seed company that targets our sales to advanced home gardeners and small commercial growers, the people who sell at things like farmers markets and through CSAs, which is really fun because we have a lot of flexibility to breed for flavor and creative things like, appearance and novel varieties of our crops. Like Claire, I am highly involved in the Society of Organic Seed Professionals. We're both founding board members, and that is my major extracurricular, you might say. And yeah, I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you. Now I'm going to open up the first topic. And the first topic is breeding strategies and theory for horticultural crops. And I think we can just go down the line if you guys want to answer the question for each panelist, or we're going to have discussion for each one, but we're going to try to keep it to 15 minutes per topic. So I'll let you know when that 15 minutes has passed. But the first question is, what is your strategy when it comes to balancing selection for horticultural traits, flavor profile, crispness, shape, versus yield when creating a desirable product in your species? So anyone can open it up if you would like.
I can start because this is something that I think about a lot in my crops. We really pride ourselves at Johnny's on breeding for flavor, but I have to think a lot about being careful to not breed for flavor to the exclusion of all other traits. So the way that I do that is by keeping all of the different traits in mind and making sure that when I present my new promising varieties to my product team to kind of talk about all of the different aspects of each variety, the strengths and the weaknesses. And we rely really heavily, as I'm sure most breeders do, on check varieties. So, we want to make sure that, if we have really new great tasting squash, it's going to yield as well as the average squash of that type, because we don't really want our growers to have to sacrifice yield for flavor.
I guess I can go next. We have a sort of unique situation in turfgrass. We probably balance seed yield and horticultural traits equally, but we cannot do them at the same time. So seed yields have to be high or growers won't grow them. And the turf quality, or the uniformity, disease resistance, all these other things that go into turf quality measurement have to be good, or consumers won't buy them. But unfortunately in turfgrass, there's actually a very strong negative correlation between seed yield and turf quality. So we have to try to break that, that linkage. So typically we alternate each year. So one year we will look at seed yield. We will pick the plants with the best seed yield, plant those in a mowed turfgrass situation where we can look at them for turfgrass quality, and then go back to a space plant nursery to look at seed yield again for the next year's crosses. So we basically have to keep going back and forth, always selecting and making sure that the plants that ultimately make it into a new cultivar have everything, all the traits we want, including seed yield and turf quality along the way. So.
Thanks for those answers. I would say similar things. I don't currently have I'm not in charge of my own breeding program at the moment, although working on projects with other people, and also have been talking to a lot of plant breeders. So one of my sort of side projects in my current role was to interview a whole bunch of different plant breeders who have done these kinds of participatory projects, or engaging farmers or end users in some way in their plant breeding programs. And so I think I've talked with a lot of people about this question, and so I just wanted to mention some of that. And I think that some of the things we've talked about is that people will eat something that tastes good, and so flavor is clearly important if you want people to eat it, and then but clearly it also has to grow well. So when working with farmers, and I've mostly been working with sort of the smaller scale, either CSA or farmers market, or direct to consumer types of growers. And so flavor is very important, and sometimes they will be willing to take a small yield hit. I mean, it still has to produce enough for it to be worth it for them to grow it, but will be willing to take a small yield hit because they can actually get a higher price for that variety. And so that's sort of one of the things we're balancing. But I do think I think Stacy, your comment about balancing seed yield with actual crop yield is an important one in sort of my work I've done with the seed industry, is that it's not always something that we think about as breeders. So I thought that was an interesting point.
I have a follow-up question for Stacy. I was just wondering, do you think that it's possible to break the linkage between seed yield and quality?
Yeah, I had that, but I forgot to mention it. We have been successful in somewhat breaking it. We have some varieties that are pretty good turf quality and good seed yield, but it doesn't happen all the time. We do have a few that do kind of break out of that mold, and we can be successful with some of them, but most of them, if they have really high seed yield, we can get them to be sort of above average turf quality. We've never gotten one that has the highest seed yield and the highest quality. So we haven't completely solved it, but we've had some success in trying to break that negative correlation.
Excellent. So I'm gonna hurry on a little bit because we still have 4 more questions for this section. So the second question is, what emerging and disruptive technologies are gaining increasing importance in the horticultural industry, and how can breeders leverage them? So if any of you can take it away. Did you hear the question okay?
Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I think one of the things that I've been thinking about is the amount of data that we're able to collect on these crops, and how it's becoming much cheaper and easier to collect large amounts of data. And I think figuring out how to best utilize that, both for collecting phenotypic data or genetic data on the crops we're working on, and sort of figuring out how to balance that with the field-based research and plant breeding is going to be really big, I think, just being able to do that kind of coding and analysis.
Yeah, I think the future is really promising in this area. You know, you could envision using robotics or drones that are combined or equipped with sensors that you could phenotype your populations, you know, thousands of plants that for traits that typically are actually pretty tedious to do, especially some of those more physiological measurements. For example, there's prototypes now that can measure photochemical efficiency, which can be an early indicator of stress. And it's not just, you know, drought or heat, but it could even be disease stress. So I feel like we're on the edge of really maximizing some of these computer and technology discoveries that really are going to be able to benefit plant breeding in the future. And I think a lot of the computational, like big data ideas are challenging, both with phenotypic data, big data, having so much data from phenotyping, but also big data from all the sequencing. And I think that's also going to be critical because we have, at least in the grasses I work on, they're heterozygous, they're polyploid, and just getting through that data is difficult. So I think things like machine learning and some of those other algorithms that we can implement into our plant breeding systems, I think are really going to help us. So I think it's really exciting time, actually.
And I had, when I was thinking through this question ahead of time, a little bit of a different perspective. I mean, I definitely agree with what both of you said, but for my crops, an emerging technology really is still just the use of molecular markers for single gene major traits. And I think that's the reality for a lot of horticultural crops. And so I think it'll be interesting to see, you know, how quickly those get developed with the increasingly better technology that we have to do that. But that's not going to happen, you know, somewhere like my company where, you know, any molecular markers that we use, at least in the near future and probably longer term, are going to be outsourced and going to need to be developed by, you know, university breeders, for example. And so I think that's something that I'm excited to use more of as they become more available. But it's something that's still going to need some work for a lot of breeders operating in these smaller crops.
Absolutely. This is a topic I'm very interested in part because if we collect all of this data and we try to use it, we need people to be able to code and interpret it, first of all. But then how do you maintain that data through generations of plant breeders? Because, you know, like a lot of phenotypic data is not published, like not directly accessible. And then if you're collecting a lot of it, like some institution has to invest money to stabilize that data and maintain it. So I don't know if you guys have anything to add about that, but I'm kind of curious if institutions have started to think about that. I'm guessing they have.
I think what I would say along those lines is it's a little bit not quite the answer, but we've been looking into this in terms of, can we use drones, for example, to drive over our 10,000 turf plots and give us an NDVI measurement on every single little plot that we have. The companies that have the drones that, for example, fly over golf courses and can tell you drought stressed areas and things like that are looking on a huge, broad area. And we wanted to narrow it down to this tiny little plot size for our breeding material. And they want, $100,000 to develop, to work through that technology to be able to give us that data. So I think, like what Lindsay said, we're not quite there yet in terms of, we don't have that kind of money to invest in that. But I think over time it's going to become easier, and hopefully it won't end up costing us quite that much money to be able to get to that where we can use that technology. But on the storage side, I think that is an issue too. But I think there's data storage issues with all different kinds of systems. So, I think all those data storage things are out there. Amazon has a big, data storage, I don't know what you call it, but
facility.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's going to be the case with everything. We're going to need this kind of data storage. So hopefully it'll happen.
Yeah, I hope so. All right, so moving on. The third question is, are there any trends towards new or emerging tech markets for horticulture crops? How can plant breeders best respond to these markets, especially since it takes time to develop a breeding program?
I guess I've been working in the organic area, organic sector, and the growth there has been steady, and it continues to increase. And I think that it is something that there's demand for. And so I think the plant breeding piece of that is sort of starting to catch up. There's been, quite a bit of research in sort of production horticulture, and I think there's becoming more in sort of the seed world and plant breeding world in terms of how to develop varieties that are going to perform really well in those kinds of systems. And so that's one of the things that I've been thinking about quite a bit.
I think the emerging area that I've been involved in addition to the organic sector, is the culinary breeding movement. So breeding for increased flavor and different culinary qualities. And that's really tied in closely to the local foods movement, which is, I think, continuing to have a lot of staying power and people being interested in where their food is coming from and being interested in the different varieties of vegetables. And so the way that I think about tackling that is, I have some collaborators that are chefs who are evaluating my varieties. I have one who's both a grower and a chef, which is really great because she's able to give me kind of diverse feedback. And the other way, in thinking about the future is just keeping my breeding material diverse and, taking note of any unique new things I see every year so that then, if the markets are continuing to change, I have all of those opportunities to go back and have things that are already partially finished that then I can move forward again in the pipeline.
From my perspective, I think it's slightly different, but in a sense the same. Organic lawn care is actually up and coming. It's been around for a couple of years, but really it's not slowing down at all. We think a lot about sustainability, low input. So we have put more focus in our breeding program into developing and breeding for low input. So by low input, I mean using less pesticides, less water, less mowing. So we have been doing and increasing that over the last maybe 10 years or so. But we've actually been breeding organic or for organic lawn care for decades. So we've been trying to improve disease resistance so that you don't have to spray as many pesticides on your lawn. But that's been our main goal for, 50 or 60 years since the program was started. So it's sort of interesting that, someone might say, what are you doing in organic lawn care? And we can say, well, we actually have varieties out there that you can survive with 80% less pesticide inputs. So we already have the products, but I feel like we actually need to do a better job getting the word out that we have these available. So I think that, in my opinion, is something, and I'm not in marketing, so it's a little tricky, but I feel like we need better communication, like, for example, between distributors or companies that would sell the seeds or plants that we develop. So
yeah, I think that is definitely the challenge, is how you integrate all of those different parts. And I think it can be challenging since breeding in and of itself is such a intensive exercise. So yeah, that's really interesting.
That is one thing that I've learned is how important it is for breeders to also be marketers of what they're breeding. Because if you don't do it, you who love this the best, then who's going to? And so I've had a lot of fun, working with our marketing team here and learning kind of how to promote what's special about our new varieties and what our customers really should know so that they'll want to grow them.
Yeah, so the fourth question, I'm trying to keep us on track. Fourth question is, there's a perception that heirloom varieties, regardless of how they're cultivated, are better for health, nutrition, and environment. Do you think plant breeders can change this perception? How do we show that a vegetable bred to use water more efficiently to resist pathogens and or to survive the journey from farm to table is actually better?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think what we were just talking about in the previous question actually ties in quite nicely with this question in terms of sort of telling the story of a new variety, explaining to people, helping people better understand what plant breeders actually do, and that basically everything comes, every food and fiber, or a lot of foods and fibers and fuels come from plant breeders, and that we are working to make things or sort of improve these crops, and tell that story and help people explain that. And I think there are some, I think this is slow. It's a slow process, but that's what I was going to say about that.
And I think the other piece of that is if you can convince people to try some of these new varieties and really, prove that they are both easier to grow and have some, better qualities, such as better taste, then that can go a long way towards gaining some trust. And so, if you can have people grow the heirloom and your new variety and they can really see the improvements, then that can help them understand why what we do is important.
Yeah, I would agree with that. We do. I recommend doing something similar to that. We don't have heirloom varieties in turf grasses, but I equated this to a golf course superintendent using Pencross, creeping bentgrass, which is actually 50 years old. It was the first seeded variety that was ever available, and it's difficult to get them to switch to something new. But I just say, just try it on a small area, see how you like it compared to this old variety, and look at the improvements that it has. And maybe that's how we can slowly, get that change to happen. But in some cases it's difficult.
Yeah, people have to see that change in order to trust it, right? Okay, so our final question for this section is, we've reached the time limit for this section. So let me just check really quick to see if there's any questions we can answer from the attendees. So an anonymous attendee asks, do the panelists feel like there are going to be opportunities for new private companies to work on breeding horticultural crops? How about opportunities in academia? Yeah, I think that.
I think now is a great time for those opportunities. I've seen a lot of small seed companies start just in the not very many years that I've been involved in the plant breeding world. And I think especially in horticultural crops, there are so many opportunities that no one is taking advantage of yet. So I would say that there is certainly plenty of potential for that.
I would agree with that coming from the university side. I work at Rutgers. We're not a big corn and soybean school. We're a big specialty crop school. So we have, our plant breeders are doing horticultural crops and, fruit trees, cranberries, things like that are not, your typical corn and soybean commodities. So I think there's a lot of potential for, underutilized vegetable crops that have natural products and human health aspects that I think really are kind of gaining. And I think there's a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think that there's more recognition of sort of by the general public of plant breeding in the food system and where it fits and how there are a lot of opportunities to use plant breeding to fill these various niches. And so, I mean, it's still, I know that's kind of general, but I think it also gets back to just helping people understand what plant breeders do and how they can fit into these new and emerging markets and business opportunities. So,
what about new opportunities in academia? Do you guys know of any opportunities there for orphan crops?
We have a breeder, his name is Jim Steinman, who works on a lot of these, African indigenous vegetables, very minor, niche crops. And he is so busy. He's got a line out the door for students that want to work in this area. So I feel like, as we try to hire new faculty, it should be in this area, in my opinion. But I'm not the dean, I don't make those decisions, but that's what I would recommend. I think there's definitely a need for kind of utilizing these crops and getting a ton more breeding work done on them. There's lots of opportunities, really.
That question was from Josh Anderson. I forgot to say that, so thank you, Josh, for that question. There's one other, looks like, from Rachel Hotengren. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And the question is for Lindsay. It asks, you talked about the growing use of marker-assisted selection by seed companies, and I'm wondering, is there anything that could be done to help increase adoption of that time and resource-saving technology, apart from public institutions continuing to work on marker development and publishing those sequences?
Yes, I think there definitely is. And specifically, the marker development part is, of course, the first step. And then what needs to happen is, I think if universities can work with service provider type companies, where I can send my leaf punches and get my marker results back. If the universities can work with them to develop those markers for those systems and then publicize that, I think it would be a huge service. So then, I don't have to start with, a publication and emailing the PI for the, marker sequence. I can just, call this company and say, can you run this marker for me, please? And so I think the more that we have that happening, the better. Whether it's, the first company that uses it is generous enough to make that a publicly available thing, or whether it's the universities doing it themselves.
So you mean we should look towards relegating marker-assisted selection, like the development of those technologies, to private companies?
No, to clarify, so one of my lab mates, Bill Holdsworth, when I was a PhD student, developed some cast markers from existing markers that our lab had published, and then wrote a paper presenting those with the, the numbers or what have you, so you could go to LGC and get those run. So the, the genetics work would be done by the universities, but then they could also hand off the sequence to someone like LGC who might want to be involved in it, who can then have it be kind of a ready to go thing.
Got it. Yeah. Well, we are going to move on to the second topic, which is breeding outlook for the future. And the first question to all of you is, what types of new positions in horticultural crop breeding, if any, do you predict will be available as a consequence of these emerging technologies and markets? So I'll open it up to anyone who would like to begin.
So the first thing that came to mind for me was actually kind of directly related to the molecular marker piece, which is just more service provider type companies or people who can help facilitate those sorts of things for smaller seed companies, including all of the new, companies that might have 2 people working at them that are continuing to be created. And in addition to molecular marker service providers, I see a lot of value in people who might be willing to do disease testing, for a fee, for things that, for example, that I cannot test for in Maine. There's not really a great wealth of resources for sending your variety somewhere to be tested. I mean, obviously there are some universities doing that, but there could be more. And then also just some people who could get paid to help with a more robust regional trialing system could be a real service for, again, these companies that don't have large enough breeding departments and resources to have that in-house.
I had a different idea, which I think there's a place for. Some of the new positions I see would be a link between plant breeding and analyzing all this high throughput phenotype data, or translating genomics and bioinformatics data into correlating that to horticultural traits. So I think there's a place for positions where people would have a plant breeding knowledge and either computer science or some type of analysis, bioinformatics analysis, things like that. And then I also think, which we kind of talked about already, which was the idea of breeding for natural products. I think that is a huge opportunity as well. So I would hope there's going to be new positions. I already saw one for phenotyping and plant breeding, a new position open in that area. So I think it's going to come.
Yeah, I had similar sort of thoughts about this when I was, because I think it was referring to the question in the previous one about the emerging technologies, and sort of thinking about how to either have positions that still were definitely positions generating new varieties or developing new varieties, but partnering with people who had the capacity to sort of work with those technologies and think about sort of unique partnerships in that way.
Thank you. So in the interest of time, we're going to move on. The second question for the breeding outlook section is, in an environment where there are more plant breeders than positions, how can students make themselves more marketable in horticultural crop breeding, especially considering the gap between academic training and commercial needs, as well as the ongoing mergers within private industry?
I mean, being kind of on the job market, on the sort of permanent job market myself, I think I've been thinking about this a lot. I do think there's also opportunities to think about creating different types of positions or using plant breeding skills in different ways, or creating your own type of position. And I know that's sort of vague, so I'll try to think of an example. But yeah, I think just trying to maybe from the academic sense and training programs, thinking about how to encourage students, or figuring out what those skill sets might even be. I don't know if that would be some kind of, survey of what of those needs exactly aren't being met, and considering how to incorporate them, or having different tracks that students could take during their PhDs.
I think for me, the most helpful thing that I did, and I'm pretty sure helped me be more marketable when I was looking for jobs, which wasn't very long ago, was just the chance that I had to actually do applied breeding and run a portion of our lab's breeding program as a graduate student, because that is not a given at all, especially as more graduate projects are related to all of the big data or RNA-seq work, or anything that can take you out of the field and more into the lab. And so if you're looking to be a breeder as opposed to one of the kind of breeding related positions, I think getting out there, being able to do all the different phases of the process, from planning to field work to selections, can be hugely helpful. And I know it really helped me hit the ground running when I made the transition from being a student to being a professional breeder. And then I think the thing that I didn't really learn a lot about that would have been helpful, and I would guess would also really make students marketable, is getting more of a business background. So you get kind of thrown into budgets and strategic planning and goal setting and, you know, communicating with all the different parts of the company, sales and marketing and operations. And so I think, you know, the more experience you can get with that and also management skills, the better.
Yeah, that's exactly what I had. Those are areas, in my opinion, that I am weak on. I never really took any business or marketing classes. I was always science, science, science. I wish I did take them, because I think it would help in our community. We work with, you know, 25 different seed companies, and understanding what their goals are and what we need to do to help them, or to provide varieties to them, or market, you know, those varieties, would be really helpful. So I would encourage students to, you know, be as diverse as possible. Take business classes, take marketing classes, take social science classes. I mean, there's lots of different things. And then the one thing I always tell my students, they don't always like it, but I tell them never to say no to an opportunity to volunteer for something. Help another graduate student, you know, plant his trial. It's a totally different crop. Who cares? Something in the end might turn up that there's a job opening, and it's in this crop that you actually helped plant, you know, and they have experience in it. So usually they come back and say, you know, that was really, thank you for, you know, making me do that at the time. But, you know, at the time they were like, oh, I don't want to do that. That means nothing to me. I have no interest in that. But anyway, I'll just share that.
So don't pass up opportunities. Keep all doors open. That's good advice. So we're going to just move on to our next section, because we have about 15 minutes left before 11, or sorry, for the end of the hour. So the next section is challenges faced by minorities in plant breeding. And the first question is, the recent increase in female breeders is very encouraging. However, young female breeders may be faced with a lack of established female breeding mentors. Any suggestions on how this could be addressed?
So I think for me, one of the places, and this wasn't sort of specifically related to being a woman in plant breeding, but where I found sort of a community of people, and I think we maybe all stayed in plant breeding because of this, was actually the Student Organic Seed Symposium. So that was a conference that started about 7 years ago. And there have been a number of us that have, you know, continued to stay in touch over those 7 years, or as new people have joined, maybe not quite 7, but and it's led into I think a really robust community of people, and a lot of those people have been women. And I think that's been, I don't know, encouraging for me, or helped me in my own career trajectory, sort of stay in plant breeding and consider myself, yes, I am a plant breeder, and here are all these people who are also doing really cool things in plant breeding. And we sort of had each other to rely on. And so I'm not necessarily saying everyone should join that group, but sort of figuring out how to build community, even if it isn't necessarily someone who's sort of in an older or a more advanced in their career kind of mentor, but even within a graduate student group or postdocs, or young career professionals who can then rely on each other and talk about things that they want to talk about and feel like they're supported in that way.
And I had a very similar answer to Claire, in that I don't have currently, especially a lot of, you know, female role model support, mentor support, but I rely heavily on my fantastic female colleagues and my female plant breeder friends from across the country and world. And that has really allowed me to take pride in what I do and what we all do, and be confident in, you know, the future. There will be plenty of female mentors, because there's a lot of us in the industry now. And
I think there's a lot of opportunity within NAPB. maybe something could be started where at the meeting, maybe you have a lunch or a dinner and you get together and you talk about things, and then maybe that grows over time and you can get a network of people together that can continue, the discussion. So I think there's a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, that's kind of a similar thing to what I was thinking, is there's probably more opportunities for those types of things to happen. So maybe something for NAPB to think about.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so our second question is, in the agricultural field, breeders interact with people from different backgrounds and cultures. Can you how do you promote acceptance among a diverse set of individuals who may work on or support your team? So the question is about promoting acceptance.
So I approach that in kind of two different ways, although I guess I hadn't really thought about it until I got this list of questions, so I shouldn't act like I'm an expert. But I think I like to recognize what each individual person is bringing to our team, because we all have different, expertises. And so then, different life experiences or backgrounds can all provide a lot of value. And also, just by admitting my weaknesses, I think it's important to help other people feel comfortable and accepted if, I can kind of admit to the things that I might be less strong with. Like, I've never been a professional grower, so I, need help from people who have been to help understand our customer viewpoint.
Yeah, I think spending time talking to, having almost like some unstructured time with the group that that I'm working with is important, and I think has led to sort of building that trust among each other, especially if you're working with people from especially different backgrounds from you, or trying to and I guess I'm thinking, well, I don't know, but just listening to each other, taking the time to listen, taking the time to ask questions about each other, and yeah, like Lindsay was saying, I guess just making sure that that people are honest with each other, and building that trust amongst a group. I guess it's any kind of team building type of activities, and I think those are important.
Yeah, I haven't had too much of an issue in this area, so I found this question a little kind of hard to answer, I guess. We often try to have discussions with different stakeholders that might have a different viewpoint or culture, but we don't necessarily work specifically, for example, in a developing country with growers from that standpoint. So I don't have that experience really, but in my own experience, I treat everyone with respect, and I really like the idea that Lindsay mentioned, and I do it also, is, you realize your own limitations, and so that everyone else can realize their own also, and it's okay. And, you can all kind of work through that and get everyone's best point or best qualities and make the whole team better.
Yeah, to be aware that there are different backgrounds at times coming to the table, right? Well, thank you. And our third question is a follow-up to the previous, and it asks, do you have an example of when your team benefited from a diversity of perspectives?
I think there's a lot of examples of this. I think, also there's sort of different kinds of diverse perspectives, whether we're thinking like personal backgrounds or we're talking about sort of different positions, like if you're working with farmers or growers, or you're working with sort of end users. I think that also relates, like a lot of those same things that are important when sort of working, like maybe specifically in a plant breeding team with people from different personal backgrounds. But I don't know, again, I think like listening to how people might approach a problem differently, or think about a problem differently often has led to a benefit, in sort of the ultimate solution for me anyway. Or has made me think about maybe like a plant breeding problem in a different way, because I talked to someone, you know, like a farmer who's actually growing the crop, and you never really considered that, you know, whatever they mentioned was even an issue. So I think just talking to a lot of people, and getting a lot of different perspectives has helped me in the various projects I've been involved in.
I think I've also benefited a lot from diverse perspectives, and kind of as a follow-up of what I said in the last question, you know, taking advantage of the wealth of grower knowledge that's available just in our R&D staff has been really helpful for me. So kind of two specific examples would be, we have, you know, a 12-person or so farm crew who is, you know, most days, you know, weeding, plowing, just doing more hands-on labor type jobs. But a lot of them have been professional growers and have a lot of knowledge that isn't really tapped into. So we've had a lot of fun the last 2 years having an afternoon out in my pumpkin field where I have them walk all of my new test hybrids and point out the ones that they think are the most promising and tell me why. And that's been really helpful to either get confirmation of ones that I was already thinking about advancing, or, you know, getting my eyes open to whole new characteristics or traits that I should be thinking of. And then my technician, Emily, is another good example of that. She, you know, before coming to work at Johnny's, has spent a lot of time as a professional grower. And as she and I are working together out in the field, she often has really good ideas of whole new traits that I should be measuring, and can do things like, you know, evaluate and create a storage evaluation system for our winter squash, and kind of, you know, rating things by how marketable they would be for a grower to actually still be able to make money on them in that time of the season. So having those kind of people on my team has been really great.
An example for me, we just are involved with a specialty crop research initiative grant looking at low input fine fescue turf. And for that project, you're forced to do multidisciplinary, you have to have a multidisciplinary team. And so we have a social scientist, we have a marketing person, we have extension people, and to bring all those people together and look at one issue from a whole bunch of different backgrounds is amazing. Like, it is so interesting to see how a social scientist would look at how does a public land manager view using a low input grass, or what does a homeowner think? What are their main issues? So we've really learned a lot from that project, and it's really strengthened the project and made it, you know, a really interesting project that I've been involved with. And I'm really happy that, you know, I've had that opportunity to do that, because it's been really interesting to get other perspectives from different types of disciplines.
Yeah, it seems like it's a necessity, right? Because like what we're talking about is there's chefs and lots of other people who consume these products, and your perspective might be slightly different, or just, you know, maybe not as, you don't have the same perspective as them. So you need that in order to market your crops, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have something to add about that also. Is my experience working with the African Bean Consortium on dry bean breeding has been really eye-opening and provided some diverse perspectives that I probably wouldn't have gotten unless I got involved with this organization. But because it's a different environment and their working conditions are different and capabilities are different, like it's been really eye-opening to see kind of how their priorities are slightly different. You know, they breed for small acreages rather than really large ones, so that in and of itself is like presents some challenges. But just from my own perspective, it's been like a really great experience to work with them. And if I had just stayed in California and not branched out at all, I might not have gotten those perspectives. So the last question that we have, and then we'll ask any remaining follow-up questions if we need. But the last question is, what are some groups or outlets that women and minorities could join to help empower themselves and feel connected? I'm not sure, actually. I know there's organizations for women in science through AAAS. There's maybe one in NAPB, but I'm actually really not aware of any either.
I think the one that's providing that function for me right now, although it is a little bit more specialized, is the one that Claire and I are involved with, the Society of Organic Seed Professionals. And it's not, women focused, but I think right now 11 out of the 12 board members are women just by coincidence. So it provides that a lot. But I think any kind of group that lets you, interact closely with other plant breeders is going to serve a really good function of feeling like you're connected in the community. So I think going to conferences like NAPB and others can really help with that. And then trying to maintain some of those, networks and connections throughout the year can be really helpful as well.
Do Stacy or Claire have anything to add about that?
Sort of struggled with naming specific groups. I think there's also sort of been various groups within my university experiences that have been helpful, that aren't necessarily specific to plant breeding, but are maybe more like women in science types of groups. But yeah, I think just it does kind of take, I guess if you like, for those of us that are in leadership positions in different types of groups, like making sure that we're figuring out ways to make people feel welcomed and included and like a part of whatever community it is that that we're working with, is maybe like another way to think about it. But yeah, I didn't have a whole lot of specific examples.
Yeah, I struggled with this one too. But it kind of gets back to what I mentioned before. I think we can make those outlets. We can create them, even if we maybe don't have them right now. We, within the Turfgrass, they're not just breeders, but we have sort of this women in turf group that, every year at the agronomy meetings, we get together, we have dinner, and just whoever can make it shows up and comes, and we talk about different things related to not just plant breeding, but just the whole industry in general. And I feel like we can just start those. But I couldn't think of any specific group that I could name by name. But I think we just have to, that it probably means there are really not that many out there. So let's make some.
Yeah, we could make some. Definitely. I think NAPB would probably be a great avenue to do that too.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, are there any follow-up statements or things that any of you would like to say before we end the hour? No? Okay. Well, I thank you all. Oh, there's one question. Let's look at, Daniela Dvorak says the American Agri-Women and Women's Ag Lead are some organizations, and then also there's a Women in Ag series. Is that through NAPB, I wonder? Yeah, those are, I didn't know about those. So apparently there are Women in Ag focused groups, and they are, again, American Agri-Women, Women's Ag Lead, and Women in Ag series, and there's probably others, but I want to thank you all. We're going to round out the discussion. It's been very nice hearing from all of you and learning about your perspectives, and I just want to thank you all and the organizers and the attendees for taking their time today. So thank you. And if there are no further, oh, wait, let me just check. Oh, no, that's it. Okay.
All right, and just in case you didn't see the post in the chat, this recording of the panel discussions will be available on the NAPB website. And then please also tune in and register if you can to the upcoming soft skills webinar that'll be on June 22nd. And with that, I thank you, Tamara, and thank you, Stacy and Claire and Lindsay, for such thoughtful discussions on breeding strategies, opportunities, and your personal experiences. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.